Join us every Wednesday for Infocus, a weekly talk show produced by the St. Kitts Nevis Information Service, where we provide exclusives with key persons within the government and discuss pertinent, relevant, and interesting matters that affect us all. Tune in every Wednesday, live on ZIZ Radio and streamed live on Facebook at SKNIS Media and ZIZ Online. In Focus, your government, your business.
I'm Ian Richards, welcoming you to In Focus, a weekly program that takes a closer look at what's happening within and across the government of St. Kitts and Nevis. 2 weeks ago, a milestone moment unfolded in the federal parliament when the first ever disability policy was officially laid on the table. For years, the cry of "nothing for us without us" has echoed throughout the streets of Bastille, Sandy Point, Charlestown, and Butlers. Today, the government has answered that call and laid out a roadmap to build a fully inclusive society that embraces and values every person regardless of their ability. With us to dissect this policy and the 10 guiding imperatives are Minister of State responsible for disabilities, the Honorable Iselin Phillip, and Maricia Brown, Coordinator for Disability Services. Stay with us for In Focus as we highlight government's role in valuing every person, every ability.
I recognize Honorable Senator Iselin Phillip.
Madam Speaker, it's my pleasure to lay before this Honourable House the completed National Disability Policy for St. Kitts and Nevis, which is something the Ministry has been working on for a while, so bring it before this Honourable House today.
And we thank you so much for staying with us and allow me to welcome back to our program Minister Iselin Phillip and also Maricia Brown. Minister, it's been a while.
It has been.
Yes, yeah. It's good to have you.
Yes, thank you.
And Maricia, welcome to you, Maricia.
Thank you.
All right, so there is a lot to discuss. And I say that every week, but today really there is a lot to discuss.
Yes.
So we want to jump right in. And we go back to April 30th as I hinted at the opening, Minister, we would have seen, well, persons looking at it online, they would have seen an actual video of you laying the disability policy in Parliament. How did we arrive at this spot at this time?
That's a good question, and I mean, it's a pleasure for me to be able to say that we finally do have a national disability policy here for the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, because I guess work towards this point has been ongoing for a number of years since the Federation signed on to the International UN Convention of Persons with Disabilities in 2019. We essentially made a commitment to making sure that we can put certain policy initiatives in place and take action towards becoming a truly more inclusive society that recognizes persons of all disabilities. And so since we had signed that convention, obviously it's taken a while. We were able to, since we changed administration in 2022, we were able to secure a consultant with the help of the Ministry of Economic Development, who recognized this as an important part of the National Development Planning Framework. And so we were able to secure a consultant to come in to help us actually do the work to review what was already done. So we would have had a draft special needs policy within government archives. And so considering obviously the progress we've made and looking at where we were, it was needed for us to do some updates, to go back and to do some more engagements, to really hear from persons in the community, to really get all the stakeholders on board. And so we went through the policy development process, which took us about, I think, a solid year and a half to 2 years with consultations. And so we were initially able to get to this point where we had the draft policy. It was approved and accepted in the cabinet. And so we finally were at the point where we can say we finalized the document, had all the input, and it was signed off. So now we have this guiding framework to help us in our continued work as we try to institutionalize and systematize whatever projects, programs, initiatives that are truly inclusive of persons of all abilities within the Federation. And so I'm very proud to be able to say that we got to this point, because since I became minister responsible for disability services, this is one thing that persons from the community have always asked. They've always said, you know, there are initiatives that go on and take place, but in the absence of any kind of codified policy or guiding framework, you know, it's almost like we're not taking it very seriously. Right. And so I'm glad to be able to show that we are responsive as a government, as a department, to say that no, we actually do have a policy that has clearly stated imperatives and frameworks that help to guide any administration, any person coming in to support the work of creating a truly inclusive St. Kitts and Nevis. So,
and I think the work, Minister, was really advanced in the sense that the ministry was created specifically to deal with disability services, because for years it fell under social development, and
correct.
So that focus that the Prime Minister gave when he formed and created that ministry, it really gave impetus to move things forward.
Absolutely, it did. And so because, you know, obviously the work we do as a ministry allows us the time and the resources. You know, we have our very able coordinator for disability services and staff in that department to be able to really focus and dedicate their time to advocating and continue working, because, you know, with everything golfed under social development, some things essentially get lost because staff is stretched, the ministry is stretched. So having carved out a ministry that is solely responsible for disability services and empowerment of vulnerable groups, it certainly has helped, and we have seen that that has taken us and brought us to this point.
Now, we know the classification of a disability is very important, because persons can define it any way they feel like. I know someone in the United States, for instance, who has lost a finger, and they have a disability card. I'm not sure that we have that in mind yet. I suppose we'll explore that during the program. But how do we define disability? And for those who may not be aware, what are the major categories of disability that the policy focuses on?
Okay, so currently we don't yet have a national definition of disability. The policy asks for that, so that's something that we will, you know, do. So right now what we are going on is the United Nations definition, which basically talks about any long-term condition that when it's interacted with societal barriers, it prevents a person from fully engaging or effectively participating in society. And so there are many categories of disability. It can be physical, you know, someone may use a wheelchair or cane, or maybe they may be an amputee. It could be a sensory disability in the case of autism. It could be developmental, which autism can fall under as well, or Down syndrome, a learning disability. It could be an intellectual disability, it could be a visual disability. There's a lot, neurological, and some persons don't know that, but there also can be invisible disabilities. And so those are, you know, conditions that you can't see, right? And so, for instance, someone may have ADHD or anxiety disorder, even depression.
Just to break it down, ADHD, attention deficit
disorder.
Yeah.
Yes, so even that is categorized as a form of disability. So when you think about it, when you go through all those classifications, it will host a whole heap of persons in our society. Yeah.
Some people may say to some extent we all have some form of a disability. Somebody who just wears eyeglasses is somewhat visually impaired in some way, but the glasses is the assistive device. So, you know, it's a whole gambit. So I think, as I always tend to say, I think the work that we do in aging and disability is really, in terms of pushing for more accessible and more inclusive communities, really benefits all of us if we really think about it that way. So, because as Miss Brown said, it's very wide and vast, the categorizations.
Right. Okay. So according to global estimates, there are 15% of the world's population has a disability, and estimates suggest that the global population right now, it stands at around 8.2, maybe 8.3. I didn't check this morning, but when I checked yesterday, it was hovering around 8.2 and above persons. And if you use the 15% total, that would be aggregate of about 1,230,000,000 persons in the world. That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's a lot of people. Now, in St. Kitts and Nevis, I'm not sure if the 15% mark applies. However, that would be about 9,000 persons because we have a population of around 62, I believe that was revealed in the last census. But the question is then, how do we capture, as we just went through the categories of disability, how do we capture those who do have a disability in order to understand the type of services that will need to be provided for them?
So currently, we don't yet have a comprehensive database. That is one where you could tap into and be able to see how many persons and all the different forms of disability that we have here in St. Kitts and Nevis. Instead, you have different data systems in different ministries and different agencies that capture their own form of data. For instance, the Ministry of Health. So when persons go to any health facility for whatever services, their information is captured. The Ministry of Social Development, when they offer their assistance programs, information is captured there. Social Security has information. The Association of Persons with Disabilities have information. So the data is in different places. So what the policy has asked for is for all that information, all that data to come together. And so that's something that, we hope to work on.
It's important to mention that the policy is basically the roadmap. The policy does not make everything right tomorrow.
Correct.
Clearly that can't happen. It's a roadmap of how we get there.
Correct. Yes.
Right. Okay. So let's move on then and talk a bit about the policy itself now. And as I mentioned at the top, there are 10 imperatives and of course an action plan for each. We're going to not necessarily go so much into the action plan because time is limited. And I should mention that the policy, it's a 5-year policy. So 2026 to 2030. Right. And so let's take a closer look then at the imperatives. And we can begin with the first one, which I believe is the most obvious one. Mrs. Brown, you can tell me if I'm right, if that was given priority, because it's the most important thing that should happen, which is the removal of environmental barriers. Is that why that was listed as number one?
I'm not sure why the consultant listed that one, but I would think so. I'm not saying other things are not important, but when you think about barriers, that's the one thing that prevents persons, a lot of persons who have a disability, from being able to fully participate in society. For instance, if schools aren't fully accessible, if buildings aren't fully accessible, sidewalks, healthcare facilities aren't accessible, supermarkets and all those places, that means if I have a disability, especially depending on the form of disability, if it's a physical one, you're essentially telling me I have to stay home because I'm limited in where I can go. So I believe that was the reason why it was placed as number one, because barriers, for the most part, they set the tone for preventing persons from being able to fully participate.
Right, and we have some graphics that's prepared. There will be imperative one. That should be shown. There will be the removal of environmental barriers. I believe we had up the wrong graphic just now. We had a pause in. So let's talk a bit about what you mentioned into the public spaces. Now, what does that entail? Equal access to public spaces. What does that look like in St. Kitts and Nevis today?
Equal access. So it means if I have a form of disability, and I'm going out in a public space, it means that there are ramps available, in some places elevators. It means that I can freely walk and safely walk on sidewalks. If I am, by chance, if I have visual impairment or I'm blind and I want to cross the street, with the traffic lights. I'm not able to see the numbers, but at least there's an auditory system so that the countdown, I can hear that. If I'm going into a building, yes, there's a ramp, but what if I'm using a wheelchair? Are the doors wide enough for me to get inside? Your bathrooms, can I get inside your bathrooms? If I am deaf or hard of hearing, is there sign language available? if I am going to the ATM, as there tactile, signage, not just in the ATM, but other places where I can, if I'm blind, I can be able to feel and see what it says. That's what it means to have a inclusive society, and it's not just that, there's more to it, but yeah.
I have to mention that when they were building the new road up at St. Peter's, and of course they placed sidewalks for the very first time, there were several gaps in the road. Minister, I know you
Yes.
frequent that area.
Yes.
There were several gaps, and I thought that they were meant to be done so that there could be an incline in the gap, so that persons could go on and off the sidewalks at any times, like we see them in the United States. Unfortunately, they were not done that way. I believe they have something like that in Burdock, but it was a missed opportunity. And so the question is then, with new structures and existing structures, how do you get both of them at the same level?
This is a very good question, and I think this is an area where now we have the policy for sure. It's intended for us to be able to advocate for not only public but also private sector infrastructure development, for it to be just part and parcel of our thinking. Because I think for a long time, the list of things that Mrs. Brown had mentioned in terms of what equal access means are things we don't typically think about. So, you Ian, you're a wheelchair user, so you would think about that naturally. But I think not oftentimes, because it's not mandated in our building code, which is actually something that the association has been advocating for, that sometimes we miss these opportunities. But the impetus is, and through the work and the engagements that we've been doing in the ministry through the department, is to be able to help people to raise consciousness and raise awareness about, so if you're building this new project, if you're building this new road, this new infrastructure build, consider accessibility. That's something that we need to think about. Like I said, it's not only for persons who have a disability, who may be a wheelchair user, but also for aging. All of us, we age. Ramps are very helpful for that, those knees. And
the young lady with a stroller.
Exactly, the young lady with a stroller, of course. And so I think it's a matter of raising the consciousness. I don't think it's a matter of deliberately being exclusive, but I think because it's not just a natural, normalized part of our thinking in terms of accessibility, we tend to miss these opportunities. But the way we go about doing better with that is continuing the awareness building, and now we have the policy, seeing how we can advocate for some of these things to become a mandated, obligatory kind of mainstream part of our commitment to being a sustainable island state, which requires inclusivity. And so that is the work. But I must say, I think since we have started the work, we have noticed that there are some institutions, both private and public, that have sought to make their services more accessible. You can think about banks. We saw the National Bank in Bastille created a ramp specifically for wheelchair users. We see the credit union that was recently opened on the corner of Church and Keon Street thought about that. They have ramp access, and so we're seeing the consciousness being raised. We're seeing that it is being part and parcel of building our environments that are more inclusive. And so it may be slow, but of course we want, obviously, for persons who have disabilities to be able to access all of these very basic resources, banks, hospitals, clinics. These are things that we want to make sure that people can have access to.
That's definitely important. I had a conversation recently with someone who is a national of St. Kitts and Nevis, but they have lived overseas. They're retired now, but they come back and forth when it's cold in the United States. They come here, and she had some business to do with her husband. Well, I won't call the bank, at a bank. And there was no access. The person had to stay outside for 2 hours in the car. And I told her, girl, you should close that account
and go to a bank
that has accessibility.
And again, it's good business, and I think, like I said, I don't think it's a matter of deliberate exclusion, but I think we haven't always been a sober-minded society of persons living with different abilities.
Right. And we also see in the policy, it speaks about transportation. Now, transportation is a bit of a tricky one here because the buses, the public transportation system, we don't have a government-run public transportation system as some government, as some countries has overseas. I could think of Barbados in particular. And so the buses, and of course, they try to fit as many persons as they can in a bus, and there's some persons who would argue that a wheelchair, a walker, whatever aid may be taking up space. So how do you propose to to tackle that? It's a tricky question.
That's actually a pretty tough question, because as you said, just the way that our domestic transport is set up, it's not regularized or managed by the government, though that is private hire, so people can choose to do what they want to do. So I mean, for where we are right now in this context, all I would be able to offer for that is to encourage more persons to get into the business of disability transport. We currently have some businesses, small businesses, that offer that service for persons in wheelchairs, for persons who have certain abilities, and so it's a matter of making sure that the market has more options and more affordable options. Currently, I'm only aware of two. The two that we do business with.
There are more.
So there are more, and so I think it's an opportunity for economic growth and development, particularly since domestic transport is not something that is government run. So it's really just an opportunity for persons to get into that business, so that people have options for their abilities.
Yeah, and make the promotion as well too, because you weren't sure, you were aware of two.
Yes, I was aware of two.
Promote yourself. Take a Facebook ad.
Right.
Everybody's on Facebook.
And I mean, we do get calls in the ministry, but I think the resource that we do have a bus that was donated by the Republic of China, Taiwan, but we're not intending to compete with the private sector. That is not the intention for us, and so we're not offering that service as something to transport persons for their day-to-day commuting. That's not the intention, and so we do try to direct people to where they can actually seek out and afford that.
It also speaks to, as we speak about the barriers, removing the barriers to public information. We know that in the parliament in particular, there is a signer, there's someone who does hand signing for persons who would be hearing impaired. How else can we improve that system to ensure that public information can be accessed by anyone who has a disability?
Okay, so there are different ways persons can, or institutions can, consider having materials done in Braille, right? And others can consider, there are different ministries or different places when they publish a video. Yes, you have the video, but they can add closed caption. So for persons who are unable to see, at least they can hear or read, what's going on. And also to have information in plain language format. So if a person who has a learning disability, for instance, based on what information is being shared, they might not be able to understand it fully. So you might have to break it down in layman's term. And just having, auditory information out there. So there are different ways, but it just means that instead of whatever main form of information that a place is accustomed of sharing, try sharing in other format, because there are other persons who take in information in different ways.
And I know that in terms of social media, there are a lot of live broadcasts that are done. Particularly, I can speak for the church that I attend. We always ensure that the captions are available, especially on YouTube, and the channel, the stream actually airs on ZIZ as well at Sunday mornings. And so persons who may be hearing impaired, they can read and follow along. And actually, YouTube does a very quite good job of that.
They do, translating it, they do actually.
Right, even with our accents, sometimes
yes,
mix it up. Okay, we move on to imperative 2, education, training, and lifelong learning. Now, currently, students with disabilities are generally educated at different locations. Of course, we're familiar with the Cotton Thomas School and Spectrum Center. Now, we've seen in the past we are wheelchair users, and I have to say, myself, I'm one. I was able to matriculate through the traditional schools that we have here, albeit with assistance. Praise God for that, because there are steps, especially at what was junior high school. Right. I have not heard a case where a visual or hearing someone who has that challenge has been able to do that. What does the inclusive classrooms look like here, and is that a realistic goal for us here in St. Kitts and Nevis?
Yes, it's a realistic goal, I would say. And yes, we actually do have students in the mainstream schools. We have two that I'm aware of, two young ladies who attend the Washington Archibald High School. One who is partially blind, and one who is totally totally without sight. And she's actually sitting in CXCs at the moment, right? And then there is another young lady but she is deaf, and she attends the Halliday Smith Primary School, formerly known as Irish Town Primary School. And actually those two schools, the Washington Archibald High School and the Halliday Smith Primary School, have been identified as the pilot schools for inclusive education. And when you look at, for instance, one of the young ladies who attend Washington Archibald High School, she was able to get the assistance of a teacher's aide, right? And she uses a braille as well. And so it is a realistic goal. There are some steps that still need to be taken to ensure that others will be able to benefit. But we do have one of the good things is we have a relationship with the Ministry of Education, and we have that. It's not we continue to grow with that ministry, and so we hope that as time go on, we're able to have more students, not just at the Washington Archibald High School or Halliday Smith, but other schools be included.
How do you address the stigma? Again, I always like to bring up personal stories because I think it helps viewers and listeners to relate. I recall when I was at CFBC, when I first entered, of course, it was the first time that the current facility was opened. Before we had sixth form before, it's now called Kansas Private College. And there was someone who said that I should not have been included in the new cohort, that if I wanted an education, that I should go to special ed. How do you deal with that stigma where persons feel that because someone has a disability, they may be too fragile or may not be able to keep up with the pace of work and so impact the overall education level?
That's a good question. I would speak to that, I think, to take that question, because I think this is where and why the partnership with education is so important. In order for us to shift, for social change to take place, we do need to raise consciousness and awareness to shift people's perspectives on things from an early age, for a generational change and shift. Obviously, the notion of if you have a disability, you can't keep pace is incorrect. I think it's unfair to make such a generalization, because obviously we know there's categories of disabilities. Because you are physically disabled doesn't mean that you are mentally, you could be a genius, you could be an Einstein. And so I think the commitment that education has and the partnership that we continue to build with education from the ministry is part and parcel of the work of building that social change in terms of changing people's perspectives and helping people to understand. So education is committed to mainstreaming and creating more inclusive classrooms. We're piloting with actual students at 2 specific schools, one primary, one high school, but also another way that through education that we're really trying to help young people and parents see that we're not very different, is through sports. So there's actually an inclusive sports program that is run through education with partnership with the Department of Sports, where you have students with different disabilities also playing, competing in sports. So I think they do football and cricket right now, and also track and field. And so that is a way where we're able to help break down these stigmas, because then with everybody playing together, everybody's getting a greater understanding of each other. We're getting a greater understanding of how we need to accommodate, how we can be flexible, and seeing that, as different as we may seem, we're really not very much, we're a lot more alike than we are different. And so initiatives like these that are being driven through the Ministry of Education to help shift the hearts and minds and perspectives of our young people is what I believe is really key to breaking these stigmas that we've held on to for so long. As long as they have been the myths all around it, this is the way that we're actually doing that work. And so inclusive education, inclusive sports, that's something that is happening within our schools, and it is being done, as Ms. Brown said, through partnership that is being built within and across the ministries.
And of course, with the advent of technology moving so rapidly, in particular AI, there are so many technological devices
Absolutely.
that can be used. And of course, the government has been rolling out programs where each school has been equipped with Wi-Fi, and so they're able to make more use of technology. It all fits into the sustainable island state goal.
It does. And the openness that we've had, and I think the training, so we've also been able to support education with bringing in facilitators to train our teachers as to how to be more accommodating within the classroom setting. And so all of these things, with assisted devices and introducing them into the classroom certainly helps us with breaking these stigmas.
Okay, it's at the bottom of the hour. We're going to take a break and then try to get through the other 8 imperatives. We've only done 2 at this point. So stay right there, viewers and listeners. We'll be right back with more In Focus.
If you haven't done it as yet, please do it today. Subscribe to our YouTube page at SKNIS Media for regular updates, live coverage, and even more information on your government. While you're at it, like, share, and interact with our Facebook and Instagram pages at SKNIS Media and SKNIS Info.
Welcome back to In Focus. We are discussing the first ever St. Kitts and Nevis disability policy that was tabled in the Federal Parliament on April 30th, 2026. Our guest is the Minister of State responsible for disabilities, the Honorable Iselin Phillip, and Marisa Brown, who is the Coordinator of Disability Services here in St. Kitts and Nevis. The third imperative, ladies, economic inclusion and financial security. Now, what current support systems are in place to help persons with a disability become independent in terms of supporting themselves through employment?
Okay, so currently, or not just yet, we don't yet have, system per se. Right now, if a person wants to get this, a job, they would either go out to any of the workplaces and apply, or they will go through the Department of Labor. And I was just made aware a couple of weeks ago that some persons, for instance, particularly those who graduated from the Cotton Thomas Comprehensive School, that they would essentially get a form of document that, similar to a transcript, that they take to the Department of Labor, and it's attached to their file, so that if they're successful in getting a job, that helps, right? What we have done as well, our department, once or twice, when persons needed, they did not have a resume, so they asked us to provide a supporting document. And these are persons who we have grown a relationship with, persons who are part of the association or who attend the day center down at McKnight, and we're able to provide them with a document. But right now, that is the case, and it's something that we hope to improve on. We, like I said, 3 weeks ago, we met with representative from the Department of Labor, because they would have reached out to us with a concern about persons with disabilities who, yes, they're being hired, but unfortunately, they're being let go from their place of employment. And so they become unemployed. So we are now in a position where we're trying to collaborate with them to see how we can work on this. And one such way is having a workshop to sensitize employers on, the rights of persons with disabilities, and encouraging them to have more inclusive an inclusive policy within your workplace.
Did they give specific reasons? I know every case is different, but did they give any reasons as to why the persons were let go?
So from what the officer said was that that the individual wasn't working fast enough. So that seems to be the case, where persons are not working at the speed in which the employer wished that they would work.
Okay. Minister, it's a good look for companies to have persons with disabilities working within their institution. Is the government considering any tax incentives to encourage persons to do that, whether it be Well, I said tax incentive, but incentives generally, because of course credits can be given as well too. Any incentives to help promote this?
I think, well, this is a good suggestion and recommendation. I think it kind of connects with the point on, for instance, quotas. To be able for us to actually encourage and actually provide opportunities for persons with different abilities. This is something that I think there's an openness to consider. We have been, I know through the disability services, there have been a couple engagements with the private sector around this in terms of how workplaces, the private sector can make their places of work more accessible and more amenable to persons with disabilities. But I think it connects with the work in terms of awareness building. So Ms. Brown mentioned, the complaint for and the reasoning justification for letting a person with a disability go from staff is that they're not working fast enough. But I think there needs to be an understanding from employers in terms of a certain level of accommodation for a person with disability. Not because they're not working at the pace that you'd want means that they can't work. And so I think as we move along and as we continue to engage and see these issues coming up, it's certainly worth for us as to consider whether we need to legislate certain things in terms of quotas for businesses to employ or to provide internship opportunities or things like that. I know through Addie's Place, they really do make an effort to see how they can offer young persons who would have matriculated through Cotton Thomas and education to see how they can attach them to certain places just to get some experience. A small percentage of those workplaces do take on the young people. We do also, through the government, support a number of persons with disabilities on the STEP program to get them experience with skills and training. And so that is what the government is doing. But for the private sector, obviously the private sector is the private sector. And it's a worthwhile consideration based on, we have to continue collecting the data. We have to continue seeing what the issues are as they come up as to why more persons with disabilities are not being absorbed or hired into the private sector before the government takes such, a stern stance on mandating things like these. But it's worth noting it has been done in other jurisdictions, and so it's not off the table of consideration.
And Addie's Place essentially helps to promote entrepreneurship in a sense, because they make their own products and they're able to sell them. And
they do.
Entrepreneurship, of course, is a focus of the government.
Yes, and I mean, Addie's Place really seeks to support skills and independence for young persons with disabilities, and of course, entrepreneurship is an area where we want to be able to encourage and support young people in. And through disability services, we always try to see where there's opportunities for us to deliver programming to further support what's already existing and build on and expand that. So.
Right. Okay. Well, just about 22 minutes left, but I do want to touch on this before I move on, Minister. In terms of persons being able to access a loan, access financing from financial institutions. Of course, there are some policies that I would say that they are discriminatory in that sense. And now, if you're working and you are able to, pay back a loan, the fact that you have a disability should not necessarily be a counter to that. That's something that, again, that the policy is going to be talking about, the financial inclusion aspect of it. What's your thoughts there?
I agree. It ought not, the fact that you have a disability ought not be an exclusionary factor for you accessing loans and grants, especially if you are clearly ably employed. I can't really speak too much to what it is currently, but I can imagine that for a number of people, it perhaps is a barrier. I do get from my own engagement in the community, people are seeking, they have dreams just like all able-bodied folks, of having their own homes, purchasing their own vehicles, being able to do things. And so it ought not be a barrier. And so this is what this policy is essentially advocating for, to see how we can, one, find out where essentially these gaps are, to be able to continue advocating to say, okay, what needs to happen for us to shift and change this?
I come back to you on this point again, which would be imperative 4, because as you mentioned about quotas, of course, there was mention in the policy document that there should be the provision of houses for some persons who have disabilities, that a quota of, like a new project is going down. How would that work? How can the government use NHC to ensure that this is done?
That's a really good question, and this is part and parcel. Now that we have this policy, it should really help to inform the work towards social housing policy, which we don't have currently as a federation, but it does feed into the housing imperatives, human settlement imperatives. It helps us with making sure we can collect the data to know who is seeking housing, where these people are. And it is something that is advocated for through NHC. We actually do have a client I know currently who we're working with to be able to working with them to advocate through NHC how we can build their home in a way that it is obviously caters to their ability. And so it's, a lot of what we're doing here, particularly when it comes to the community of persons with disabilities, is new. It's sad to say this is 2026 and we're only kind of making these strides now, but it's a commitment that we have as an administration, and the intention is really for thinking around disability with this policy, for it to inculcate in every area, whether that's employment and labor, financial security, housing, social protection, all of these areas, and that really is the intention. So we hope that this will help to inform our housing strategy and housing solutions, as the government has committed to rolling out a number of those.
We move on to imperative 5, which is community perception and attitudes. And Mrs. Brown, I'll bring you in again and speak about the fact that, as you mentioned, and the minister would have spoke about again, that relationship that exists with the Ministry of Education. A big part of changing attitudes, it has to begin with young people. I always tell people this concept of racism. You put babies from different race in a room together, and they're all together because it's natural.
Correct.
So schools are really a good place to begin to help to promote that change. Is there going to be a consideration to help to bring this message to schools so that the younger persons, it can be inculcated with them and broaden their understanding? Of course, as we've seen, normally when they go out, not only do they take it with them as they age, but also they help their parents, grandparents, others to learn.
Yes, definitely. Actually, last year, 2025, we held a symposium for women and girls living with disabilities for International Women's Day. And we invited students from the different high schools, those who are, what's the term you call it when you are president of the club? Student council, yes, thank you. We invited the students, for 2 students from the council in each school to come to attend, and they learned about young persons living with disabilities, because what we wanted to do and what we still want to do is for them to be able to take information back from what they learn to be the voice for persons with disabilities within their school setting. Maybe they don't have someone with a visible disability at their school, but at the same time, they might have an uncle or aunt or parent or somebody within their community, and so they can be that change. So that's just one way. The other way is to the same graphics that you have, the same way we want to be able to go into the schools, of course with permission of or the collaboration of the Ministry of Education, to go into the schools to educate the students, perhaps during their assembly, the General Assembly, because we think it will go a long way.
Imperatives. You want to add
Sure,
something?
and if I could just add on community perception attitudes, I must, make a shout out to the Association of Persons with Disabilities and persons in the community for advocating for themselves to help shift attitudes. Because we know during the year, they usually also have certain initiatives, like Walk a Mile in Our Shoes, and we support in terms of, I think the blind dining experiences, just so that even within our adult population, because I think a lot of times most of the stubbornness or the reluctance to change comes from the older generation, and so we must shout out that obviously on the forefront of helping to shift perceptions and attitudes are persons from the community, to be able to help people to understand, at least have a little snapshot, a small experience as to what it might be like for them, so that we can increase and expand and deepen our understanding of persons living with disabilities.
We move on to imperative 6, which speaks to health, wellness, and rehabilitation. Now, of course, there's a perception that, should I say, a misconception that persons with a disability that they are in poor health. How does the policy address that and also open up avenues for better health care, but in particular mental health as well too, because that's very important. I know it is a focus of the Prime Minister himself, and there are certain pressures that a person living with a disability will face that someone else may not. And that, of course, that's exclusion can have a very negative impact on them.
Okay, so the policy calls for discussions about insurance, right? And it also calls for community-based rehabilitation. So, for instance, sometimes someone might have a disability and they need to do rehab of sorts. Instead of having them to travel all the way to JNF for such, perhaps a therapist, for instance, will be able to travel to the health center within their area, or even to their home, right? With regards to mental health, of course, we know the facility, the psychiatric care at JNF, as well as the National Counseling Center. We don't yet have or have not engaged in any activity to touch on mental health, but that's open for collaboration with those entities, because it really is a form of disability that is on the rise, on the increase, and overlooked. So that's something that we hope to work on.
And I'm glad to see it included in the policy, because again, it's a roadmap to getting where we should be, where the services should be available to help persons. And as I mentioned, the theme, it's anyone of every ability. Absolutely important. Okay, we move on to imperative 7. And Minister, I suppose I'll have to bring you in here again, because it speaks to inclusion in social and public affairs. Now, with the very limited time that we have, I want to touch on because of course, we have an election which is due constitutionally by 2028, I believe it is, based on the 90-day clause after Parliament was convened. But everyone has a right to vote constitutionally. How does the policy seek to enhance accessibility, confidentiality, and overall independence of persons who are going to cast the ballot? Because I don't necessarily want to write on a paper and necessarily have someone peek to see who I voted for.
This is a really good question, Ian. It's a really good question. I can't say that I have the answer specifically to that question in terms of what that might look like in the next iteration of elections. However, this is certainly something that I, for sure, have raised and would like to solicit input on, because I think some of the concerns that have come up when I've raised this in conversation have been, obviously for accessibility in terms of centers, so that persons who are maybe wheelchair users can have access. So I think that's an easier thing to figure out in terms of having to designate which polling divisions, which polling stations are actually most accessible for persons to cast their ballot. But then the question around, for instance, somebody with an intellectual disability, how do we determine whether that person may not be subject to exploitation of their vote, and those things? I think these are genuine concerns that we need to be considerate of when it comes to thinking about persons being able to utilize their right to cast a ballot, because we don't want anybody being exploited. We don't want persons being taken advantage of because of their disability or whatever category they fall in. But I think as a starting point, we can certainly think about when it comes to casting ballots, physical accessibility, and then we can, graduate to more of the conversations around persons who say have a visual impairment. How do we support them to make sure that they feel confident in terms of where they're voting? But these are systems and institutions that do need to be developed. I think a lot more careful thought needs to go into it, because when it comes to things like elections and voting, these are systems practices that can potentially be easily open to corruption and exploitation. So we want to make sure we maintain the integrity of those processes.
Right, and I know that one of the policies that exists do facilitate persons who have a disability to move to the front of the line.
Right.
So you don't necessarily have to wait in the hot sun.
Right, and I mean, I think similarly, in past elections, they would say there's a certain hour where they prioritize seniors coming, for example, for that same reason. So I think, making sure we include persons with disability so that they can get early voting rights, those things actually help to facilitate the process in persons.
And of course, participation in the decision-making process. Now, we spoke about, like, for instance, the building board. Are there opportunities for persons with a disability to lend to that, to be placed on boards, to be placed in decision-making areas where they're able to contribute and help to shape the national policy and the national discussion?
There should be, and I think that's something that we certainly need to think about in terms of moving towards. We certainly, I know through the Department of Disability Services, when we think about persons who are leading in that space, we do certainly, people call us, right? People do call us to say, oh, we're looking for a person with a disability to be part and parcel of this. Who should we reach out to? So that is, I want to encourage persons that if you're looking for a person, that you contact the department. We may be able, since we have the networks with the associations, and we usually call to see who is available and who is willing, because I think part and parcel of it is also for persons within the community to have the confidence to also step up as well. So we recognize we're also having to nurture them on that side as well.
Access to legal systems, imperative 8, access to legal systems and protection of rights. One of the things that has been a major concern for the association, of course, would be parking spaces in around town, and we know that there are some companies that do provide parking spaces. And supermarkets, I think generally we can, the ones that are the Caribbean cinemas, I'm good. These are companies that I can shout out because they do have, some hotels, they have that. Unfortunately, as I would have got to Royal St. Kitts recently, and there was a cone there, and the security mentioned that it's there to discourage persons from parking in the spot.
Yes.
And unfortunately, we see people do that a lot,
the time, no.
especially at supermarkets, which can be very demoralizing.
Yes.
In the United States, I know that there are, and I don't need to necessarily always go back to the United States, but it's a best practice that we can look at, of course. There is a sticker system that is provided by the traffic authority, and unless you have that, then persons can be ticketed, even at supermarket in private parking lots, absolutely. I imagine that there's something that should be considered here in terms of the policy. We see the space that was created on 4th Street, where persons can park and persons still park there.
Yes, it's true. We've been working on that actively.
So, to answer that, we actually have a parking permit committee that was officially launched late last year, and it includes, us, the Department of Disability Services, the Traffic Department, Planning Department, Urban Development, the Ministry of Health, IT, Inland Revenue, of course, the Association of Persons with Disabilities, because we, like you said, we noticed that persons are not respecting the space. And as such, as a committee, we are in the stage of, how should we go about rolling out this project? And so instead of a sticker that we have agreed on, it's like something that you hang on top of the mirror, so that when the traffic ones are going on, they'll be able to see, oh, this person has a disability. But of course, persons can still take advantage of that. I have the disability, I'm at home, but my sister wants to go into town and run into town. She just grabbed my thing, whether I know it or not, and she hang it up. And so the one wouldn't say anything. But we have, identified penalties. And it's something that we hope would soon be finalized.
Yes. Right, okay. And also as it speaks to legislation, now this one is very important, Minister, and I want to come to you. As it speaks to making changes to legislation or to policies that by omission, there's omission in there to discriminate either by design or not deliberately. And we could think of the jobs such as a police officer. You know, the persons have to fit into a certain category, but there are desk jobs that persons can do. So tell us what the policy speaks to about that.
So in terms of inclusion?
Right, in terms of not deliberate discriminating against persons by omission.
So, I mean, these would be changes in terms of legislation and, you know, having those types of legislative reviews, which I think, you know, thanks to our very hardworking Attorney General and his Office in Justice and Legal Affairs, have started quite a bit of work. They have engaged officers from the Ministry of Legal and Justice Affairs have engaged the ministry in terms of which legislations we think need to be reviewed, what types of amendments need to be pushed forward. And so it really depends. Sometimes we don't really know these things exist in legislation until something happens. And so this is an area where, you know, we're committed to continuing to kind of pay attention to and look for. Where we see that there is, you know, whether it was intended or not, most of the times I think it was unintended, to be exclusionary or to infringe on the rights of persons with a disability. That is something that, of course, we'll be able to flag, and I'm sure we'll be able to make steps towards having those amendments and changes, because, of course, legal system, access to justice, those things are, of course, a right and entitlement to persons with disabilities as well.
Right, we move on to Imperative 9, which is statistics and data collection to assess public policy implementation and overall inclusion, which basically speaks to, as we spoke about earlier, the need to collect data. If you're not counted, then you don't count because you're not listed there. So I suppose the question that I'll use to sum it up, because of course the number one here is the importance, Minister, of having that data collection being done and also being able to dig in deep in order to provide and influence policy.
Right, and for this point, it's continuing the work around making sure that we can have just the data point added in terms of asking the question, do you have a disability and what's the nature of that disability, included in terms of our surveying tools. And this is, I can speak to this particularly because we do have a project around data collection, disaggregating data for gender affairs, because we're similarly trying to get more data on gender. So as we advocate for gender, we also advocate for a person with disabilities to have those data points so we can actually really have a much better scope and understanding of who has disability, what those numbers look like, etc.
And finally, Imperative 10, accountability, implementation, and governance. Now, the policy requires standard mechanisms to be effective. And I think I'm going to jump to something that I think is groundbreaking, a National Disability Council. Tell us a bit about the role of that council and how it will be used to help to move along the process.
So that council will basically operate as the body that monitors all the work that's being done, right? Because we're here talking about this, but it wouldn't just be our department. It would be a group that assembles, and they will look at to see are we following along the convention? Are we following along what the imperatives say? Trying to hold persons accountable for their actions, and even to guide government ministries and private entities on the way forward. So they're like the check and balance and making sure that all of this is going as supposed to.
So, Minister, it's not just pass a policy and throw it on a table somewhere to gather dust.
That's not the intention.
It's going to be active and enforced.
And just to say, we've already started some of this work that is in the policy. I think that has been made possible with the creation of the ministry for including persons with disabilities, and the establishment of a whole unit and department with staff that are dedicated to kind of pushing some of this work forward. So it's a matter of continuation of the efforts and, you know, extending and expanding the scope of the work that we're doing.
Now, of course, there will be a national campaign to let persons know exactly a bit about what's in the policy, and this was just a brief taste, if you will, an appetizer. Mrs. Brown, can you tell us, persons who want to learn more about the policy, how can they do that?
Sure. We have a soft copy available. You can reach out to our ministry. You can call 467-1517, and then we'll be able to forward the soft copy to you, tell you the email address, or you can call 665-3984. 665-3984. That's our department specifically. The first number is the ministry's administration number. And we also have a hard copy. Well, we are preparing the hard copies, and those will be distributed to stakeholders hopefully within the next few weeks.
All right, and I imagine, of course, that it will be posted on the government's website as well. It's a policy document.
Yes, I understand that within the Cabinet Secretariat, they're actually developing a repository of national policies,
right,
and
yes.
so ours will be there.
Right, Capsec spoke about that when he was here. We are essentially out of time, but I'll give you an opportunity for any final comments. Mrs. Brown, I'll start with you.
Sure. One thing I just wanted to point out was that with regards to employment, one of the things that the policy asks for is for private sectors or any place at all to be able to identify a disability champion, and that person would be, they will look out for any person with disability that works within that space. So it's not like the person is hired and they're all alone. That the person who has a disability will be able to turn to that disability champion for guidance, and anything that goes wrong or such, that champion will essentially reach out to their employer, reach out to us or the council and for guidance.
Support system is
Yes.
very important. Minister?
I would say that, to reiterate the commitment that is made by this government administration under the leadership of the Honorable Dr. Terence Drew, that we are trying our best to see how we can definitely create more inclusive societies, but it's not just the government's work for us to do that. And so I always make a clarion call for all of us within society to raise our own consciousness, raise our awareness, to be more accommodating, to be more understanding, so that persons can truly feel and be included in our everyday life, and so that they too can benefit from the quality of life that this government administration is seeking to deliver for all people in the Federation.
It's all about valuing every person and every
Absolutely.
ability.
Yes.
Minister Philip and Mrs. Brown, we thank you so much for joining us for this edition of In Focus. We'd like to thank you, viewers and listeners, for being with us. We trust that you will join us next week at the same place, at the same time, for another edition of In Focus. Remember, here we discuss your government, your business. I'm Ian Richards.
Join us every Wednesday for In Focus, a weekly talk show produced by the St. Kitts Nevis Information Service, where we provide exclusives with key persons within the government and discuss pertinent, relevant, and interesting matters that affect us all. Tune in every Wednesday, live on ZIZ Radio and streamed live on Facebook at SKNIS Media and ZIZ Online. In Focus, your government, your business.